If your family can't afford $500 per kid, your kid doesn't get to play. Today, play is a privilege in America.
2 out of 3 kids across the state of California are not meeting CDC guidelines for physical activity.
That's James Lopez, Director of Advocacy at LA84 and Play Equity Fund, who are leading a national movement to turn play into a given, not a luxury.
It's like a huge festival. It felt like the Coachella for play. Play Day is a national celebration for the power and joy of sports and play and movement in communities. We invite folks to just get out and play on that day. If every kid had access to play, we would be a healthier society.
This episode is brought to you by Kuul Play, the platform that's changing the game for how kids engage with movement and sports. What would help us even more is if you choose to subscribe. Now let's dive into the episode. Play is one of the most unequal privileges in the US today. Today's episode is about the work being done to change that, led by LA84 Foundation and their sister Play Equity Fund, who are at the forefront of reimagining access to sport and movement across the country, and particularly in LA. Representing that work is their Director of Advocacy, James Lopez, a trusted voice helping bring National Play Day to life across the country and reminding us that play shouldn't be a privilege, it should be a given. James, welcome to Kuul Conversations.
Thank you, Claire. Thanks for having me on. I'm really looking forward to our conversation. I appreciate the opportunity.
Oh, absolutely. Listen, let's start here because I think most people maybe don't realize how unequal access to play really is. So what are you seeing today that should have us all paying attention?
Yeah, when we talk about play equity at the LA84 Foundation, it's really about making sure that everybody has access to not only just play, but quality play, structured play, sports. We know that structured play and quality play can lead to just lifelong benefits. So you'd be surprised to learn the inaccessibility of play, really driven largely by economics, and like how much money a family makes shouldn't determine their access to play. And across the country, we have a pay to play model where, you've got to shell out hundreds of dollars to register a child into, your local recreation program, your local sports program, and that sidelines a lot of folks. And so we see a lot of disparities in access to play and quality play along socioeconomic lines. We've studied the issue for years, and just last year, we took a look at our first ever statewide report, the California Play Equity Report. And we saw that 2 out of 3 kids across the state of California are not meeting CDC guidelines for physical activity. So the CDC requires a daily physical activity, 60 minutes a day of physical activity, vigorous play, moving your body, exercise. And, 2 out of 3 kids aren't getting that every day. And so it's a big issue. And so how do we reimagine our systems, whether that's a public school system, our community sports system, and how do we educate our communities to change that? And so it really is about systems change as opposed to just, education and awareness. We've got to really work hard to change the way we think about the value of play.
And when you talk about sport equity, I know that LA84 expands that to movement and play as you're talking about. Why is that reframe just so important?
When we just use the word sport or maybe athletics, it's not always going to unlock the door to conversations with most folks. Like a lot of the times, we've learned that people think about sport and athletics as something that's for high achieving athletes. It's like this track to be an elite athlete and play at the collegiate and professional or maybe Olympic level. That's really not what we're talking about when we talk about play equity. We often say sport, play, and movement, healthy physical movement, things like yoga, walking, going on a hike, riding a bicycle. These are all things that benefit our mental wellness and our physical wellness and provide social connection. It wasn't that long ago when we were all in a COVID-19 lockdown pandemic, and a lot of the young folks who, let's say you were kindergartner at that time, 5 years old, now you're coming up to maybe 10 years old, and you're having to still play catch up on learning how to make those social connections. And you've missed out on a year and a half, 2 years of play in your school or in your community. We've got to make sure that kids are getting the opportunity to play and come together, move their bodies, and get all those benefits that we know that play can provide. Learn how to have healthy conflict resolution on the playground, learn how to play fair. I have a 3-year-old right now, and sharing, right? Having healthy, not throwing the toy across the room, but by expanding the language we use, we invite more people into the conversation, and we kind of demystify this concept of like sport is just for those elite athletes. It's for everybody.
I absolutely love that. I'm a huge proponent of that too. And coming from being an athlete in the collegiate system, I understand that world, but it is very limiting. And I think for today's kids especially, and you highlighted it beautifully there with COVID-19 in terms of how that restricted even play, not to mention our lifestyles in general, restricting maybe free play. There's never been a need, to have play, movement, and that definition expansion, which I absolutely love. And yet we still have a lot of play inequity. And you've spoken to systems change. How is it that you guys are viewing systems change, given the fact that so many millions of kids are still not playing enough?
As director of advocacy for our organization, we have to come up with our strategy or our framework for how we're going to approach systems change. So our work, I see it as having 4 lanes on a highway, and they're all going to the same destination. But one is just around communications and marketing, building awareness for what we're talking about. What is play equity? You have to ask yourself, has equity kind of become like a dirty word in today's arena of conversation? How can we best have these conversations? But really about communicating what the issue is, why it's important, not only communicating what the gap of access is, but why that's so important, why it's important to understand that when kids don't have access to play, they lose developmental opportunities. And it's about youth development. And it's about community wellness, health, mental wellness. This conversation expands beyond just play, but it expands it to the arena of public health, education, and social emotional wellness. So that's one, communicating what the gap is. 2 is about research. Like I mentioned earlier, our California Play Equity Report, we have to develop relevant data and research so that we can track progress, but also make sure that we have the most relevant interventions, most relevant prevention tools to keep going forward. And the 3rd is about power building. We convene a coalition of nonprofits here in Los Angeles, about 50 organizations that get together on a regular basis to talk about the challenges we experience in community, to ideate solutions, to show up together, to publicly advocate when there are opportunities to drive more funding to the play and sports sector, or to advocate for prioritization of sport and play in different contexts like after school or PE during the school day, things like that. And then lastly, that 4th lane is when we can, it's about direct advocacy for public policy. So when there are public policies on the table locally here in California, or maybe even nationally, we've got to show up and speak out and support. We've got to make our voice heard together as a collective. In order to advocate for better play opportunities, we've got to be the loudest voice in the room. I think play sometimes gets left behind in the conversation around youth development and education. We often hear leaders talk about STEM, which are all good things. Like, we have to get rid of the idea that there's not enough resources to do everything well. I think STEM is important. Academic success is important. Testing, sure, in the public school system, we've all got to take our tests and do well. But when you look at the research, we know that play is a key ingredient to like unlocking and extending attention spans and making sure kids are well enough to learn in the classroom. So it's a complementary conversation. So those direct advocacy opportunities are super important. Most recently, the Play Equity Fund, an example of this work is really, and a good example of how we're reimagining systems is California Assembly Bill 749. We call it the Youth Sports for All Act. So it's a bill here in California that will put together a commission of experts, community leaders, and again, study play equity across the state, and then make recommendations and to visualize and find relevant data and information to see the path forward to a centralized statewide governing entity to look at youth sports in community. So we talked about like the inequitable access due to cost, safety, standards, unified coaching standards. It's a very fragmented system of youth sports in the state. So this is a legislation that would require the state to really take a role. We think there is a role to kind of centralize everything and create unity and make sure there's fair access and safety for everybody. So an example of how kind of we think about changing systems in this example, through legislation.
That's really, really important, and it was profound and a huge step forward. And then I'm wondering, what would that actually unlock for kids and communities? How do you see that playing out if it was to pass?
This bill, if it gets passed, let's say it gets signed into law, it would go into effect January 2026. And what it will do is start the process. So it is a study bill. So at the end of the calendar year of 26, there would be a study completed, informed by this commission of experts that are statewide leaders, grassroots leaders, to make recommendations to the legislature in 2027 to say, okay, here's the issues, here's our report, and here is our recommendation for a centralized governing entity at the state level to make sure fair access and safety for youth sports. So that is the sort of deliverable for this legislation.
Okay.
But in that recommendation is the path forward to that centralized body, because we want to take a measured approach. If we maybe sponsored a bill that said we're going to create a brand new department from scratch just right now, there's a budget shortage in California that's pretty severe. So creating a new department is not realistic right now. And we want to be data informed. We want to do the study first, take a measured approach, gives us time to build allyship, gives us time to do the work well instead of rushing into something.
That makes complete sense. And how do you see then LA84 and Play Equity Fund complementing that work if that was to, when those recommendations come through in the path forward, do you feel like that strengthens where you're at with that centralized approach?
I think so. I think, LA4's role as a private foundation, really what we've become known for is as a funder. We want to support grassroots sports-based youth development play organizations throughout the region and here in Southern California. So that work will continue, right? Until there's enough resources to sustain a new reimagined equitable play system for everybody, that work's got to continue. So LA84 will continue to make grants, continue to lead conversations and be a national thought leader, convene folks at our summit to elevate issues, come up with solutions. Every other year we have this 500-person summit. I'm sure you've been there, and be a part of those conversations and be a part of the conversations at Project Play and be a part of the conversation across the country to just build unity, build allyship, continue to work towards equity. And then on the Play Equity Fund, we will continue to do our advocacy work. We'll continue to do the research, and just let's say we imagine this centralized governing entity exists, in 2028, 29. Maybe 28 in time for the Olympic Games here in LA to celebrate the Olympic legacy. There's still going to be work to make sure that's done equitably and fairly, and we'll continue to show up for community. This is a long-term mission. It's not going to get solved by 2028, but I think we can use those Olympic Games as a significant mile marker, and to really elevate the progress we will have made by then.
James, you've been in this work for such a long time. You know the space inside out. If you were to put yourself in 2028 now, and the Olympics is about to happen, and the best case scenario, paint the world that you would like to see for equitable access for kids in play. What would the system look like that supports that? Where's our North Star here?
Yeah, thank you for that question. It's fun to imagine, and then helps you kind of, stay motivated. I think that California Youth Commission on Sports would exist and is up and running, and there'd be unified safety coaching standards for community youth sports across the state. And also, I think that, every kid has free sports and play activities after school in their community. We eliminate the barrier of transportation, which is a big one, and that schools offer free programs on campus after school. We learned that a lot of parents in our report rely on school sports or after school sports to be kind of like extended childcare as well, right, as folks are finishing their workday. So if I'm waving a magic wand, it's that every elementary, middle, and high school has recreational activities in addition to like the competitive athletics free of charge for families without having to travel. So obviously to get there, there's a lot of barriers, right? There's the funding. I imagine schools will have to partner with community-based organizations to implement those programs, right? Teachers can't work 14-hour days. And so, and looking at green space in our region is super important. And so when you ask that question, I mostly talked about my experience here in LA and California, but things are moving on a national scale as well. So we want California to lead. And I think the 2028 Games as a mile marker is a great opportunity to showcase our leadership, to elevate the story of progress towards play equity. And there's a number of big time sporting events that are coming to the state as well. We have the World Cup, some of the games here in the Bay Area in LA in 26. So anytime there's something like that, we want to lift up our story, build that awareness, and build partnerships so that we can drive the work forward.
That's such an exciting vision painting. It's always fun to look ahead, and I couldn't agree more around the school space. It's place where Kuul Play plays a lot in, and we saw that like if we can support the after school space and provide opportunities for kids to play, it really makes such a difference and provides a pathway for them. And I think it's an untapped space, so I'm really excited that you mentioned that as a way forward for so many kids. One of the things that when I was reading through the report, and it struck me, and I'd love to get your take on this, on youth sports, the industry in the US, it's about a $40 billion industry. And yet, when we look at the report, statewide in California, over half of all youth don't participate in structured sports or play at school. And then girls of color in California are still the least likely to be active. And you know, we have this massive imbalance here. And I don't know that people are always aware of that. What would you feel like is the story here that most people never get to hear or see with these two opposing sides, if you like?
Yeah, you know, it's hard to imagine that a massive industry is sidelining so many kids, but the reality of the market we've created for youth sports is that it's a market. You've got to pay, you've got to buy. And so, you know, a lot of families don't have resources to buy into these large scale, hyper competitive clubs and high level leagues. And even if you find an affordable league that's local to your community, you know, you often have to purchase your own equipment or kind of fundraise for tournament play and things like that. So I think folks maybe don't realize that it's kind of gotten spun way more towards just a market, and it's a marketplace. I don't think we think about youth sports like that. On one hand, we hold on to kind of the community recreation, the local soccer league, so local baseball league. We love that in our imagination about youth sports, but we haven't realized that experience, even that is like non-club, non-hyper, that's still like over $100 per kid. And so when you have families who have multiple children, they're often, you know, having to choose, okay, only one child can play this season, one child per season. We have to make it work, you know, and we did some work with Nike. We've been doing work with Nike over the last 4 years around looking at girls in a couple neighborhoods here in LA. And parent engagement, we found, is a big ingredient to making sure those girls of color that you mentioned have access. There are, in some Latino communities, we still see some of the traditional gender roles around, you know, boys can play sports, but girls don't. And so there's some parent engagement in education, community education, that we're working with different partners on the ground to kind of engage communities. And once parents understand that sports is a pathway to academic success, to overall wellness, parents want those things for their kids. And so we look at parent engagement as a key ingredient, but then also access is super important. You know, are there enough girls' leagues in our neighborhoods? You know, are we forcing girls to play with the boys when they shouldn't have to, where they should have their own space and their own leagues? You know, we see like mixed gender leagues up until a certain age, and then the girls' league disappears and there's just a boys' track, right? So there's a lot of issues, but I think the biggest thing, I think, if you ask me, like, what's something that folks may not know or understand, is that you really have to understand that the youth sports ecosystem has become a market, and we've got to do the work to make sure the market is still serving and providing opportunities for those who can't pay the big bills out of pocket. And so that's the uphill battle. That's the battle for equity, where you have free or affordable programs in your neighborhood, but it's still the same quality and the same youth development experience that perhaps you may have had to pay $250 for somewhere else. How do we get there? How do we get the same quality and fair access?
Absolutely. And you spoke to all the ROI benefits for so many people to get involved and support with providing this type of access, because there's so many benefits to economic benefits, societal benefits, and it doesn't need to be the extreme cost, because we also know that even with that pay to play model, that experience and play experience can be negative too.
Yeah, you mentioned economic and societal benefits. There's something we learned in our advocacy for the Sports for All Act here in California, but California has the highest obesity rate in the country. And we know that physical activity in sports is just part of the equation to lowering obesity. But we learned that in California, if we can lower the BMI by just 5% statewide, It'll save over $85 billion in healthcare costs. In chronic diseases, lowering chronic diseases like diabetes, high blood pressure, heart disease. Just lowering the BMI by 5% statewide can save over $85 billion. Think about the reinvestment into communities we can have from a health perspective, from public health perspective. That's a lot of dollars saved over the years. So it's helpful to think of it in that way as well when you talk about the economics of it. We've got to do the work now to have healthier communities through play so that we don't pay higher costs later. And so that's also kind of a reimagining of how we approach societal problems. We have to hold prevention and intervention at the same time, which is very difficult to do because there's not enough resources and it's very challenging. But this play is one of the prescriptions, if you will, or one of the interventions that can accomplish so much over the long term.
It's remarkable, isn't it? For every dollar of play, I would love to know how much return you get. I imagine it's a 10x investment based on those statistics that you said. And it ripples across, like you said, so many aspects of society. It speaks to health, it speaks to academic success, it just speaks to so many spaces that a bit like, we'll say, even women's sports, the way it has, we've seen so much more investment because we see the ROI in so many aspects. I often think of youth sports in that way and just you play and how, as you said, prevention, it's underestimated, undervalued, but it's massive, especially when you do it at a young age.
Yeah, the expansion and boom of women's sports is a great parallel to draw, really, because now folks are investing in women's sports, right? Putting their money there and seeing the benefits and seeing the ROI. And we've got to get the same thing from our public leaders for play. Seeing the community and societal benefits down the road is, in my experience, it's hard to hold both those things at the same time. One, holding the present issue and making interventions and trying to treat the wound, if you will.
Right.
And at the same time, being preventative to make sure that wound doesn't happen in the same place. Right.
Yes.
And it's a very difficult thing to do.
It is. But I would say that you're going a long way on down that road in terms of taking, as you said, a measured approach and systems level change while still funding and trying to address the gaps at the same time. And that's the beauty of the work that you're doing, I think, in being able to solve a very complex problem that crosses multi-sectors.
I sit in a position where I reap the benefits of an Olympic Games from 40 years ago that was successful, that broke the mold for the Olympic Games. And with the legacy of the LA84 Foundation and the development of the Play Equity Fund working together towards one mission, but different tactics, right?
Right.
And so you have the charity, you have the grant making entity, and then you have the advocacy engine in the Play Equity Fund. And these things together, we're able to be really nimble and slide into different conversations and different arenas. And so we're really, credit to our board and our leadership and our CEO and kind of just positioning us well to be nimble. And again, another great example of being able to look ahead, right? And so with the creation of the foundation 40 years ago, they knew they wanted a lasting, enduring legacy for youth sports and physical activity and play. And so here we are 40 years later doing the work. And now we've got to reimagine the next 40 years with the Olympic Games coming again and say, okay, we have made some progress, but, we still have equity gaps. What's the path forward?
Love that. And I want to bring us into the joyous, not quite the Olympics, but the Olympics of this year, if you like, for Play Day, because it's what makes the work live and breathe that you've been talking all about. Can you tell us what is Play Day and what is happening on June 28th?
Oh yeah, Play Day is a big one. It's our fourth, I believe, annual Play Day. And really what Play Day is, it's a national celebration for the power and joy of sports and play and movement in communities. We really want Play Day to be similar to Earth Day. We joke about when we see Play Day on the Google Calendar, that's kind of, we know we've made it. But Play Day is, we want it to just be a day where we all stop what we're doing and recognize the importance of play. We celebrate, we go outside and we move our bodies. We play a game of basketball with our families and with our community, or we go for a hike, or we go for that run, or we go for a swim, and we play. We reconnect with the joy of play. Here locally in LA, the LA84 Foundation will be throwing its second annual block party. So we're working with the city to shut down the streets here in our neighborhood in West Adams. And we're going to have live music, entertainment, tons of sports for kids to try. like a huge festival. And then it's totally free to the community. I just got to register online, but we'd love folks in the LA area to come out to our block party and celebrate with us. And you'll recall like those 4 lanes of advocacy I mentioned earlier. The play day like ticks all the boxes. It's our opportunity to really build awareness for our issue, celebrate our victories, elevate solutions in the media as we get media coverage and talk about the importance of sport and play. Our goal is play equity, but our vehicle to get us there is going to have to be the joy of play, the joy of sport. And so that's what Play Day is all about. We want to reconnect with the joy and engage everybody. So this is a national movement. Across the country, we've coordinated an effort with 120 different partners across the country. So different leagues and boys and girls clubs and YMCAs and sports organizations across the country also activating on June 28th to be part of this National Day of Play. We've shipped out 120 what we call Play Day in a Box kits to our partners to provide some resources to play. Very simple stuff just to get kids and families moving. Chalk, for example, to draw a 4-square on the floor and some balls to play. You can draw hopscotch, jump ropes, basketballs, footballs, soccer balls, very kind of low entry as far as experience and ability, but high impact in the ability to just get folks moving and having a good time and sharing a laugh as, parents kind of trip over their own feet trying to remember how to do hopscotch and things like that. So, we're really excited to be partnering with 120 different organizations across the country. We're going to have over 20,000 kids and families moving on June 28th. If you count the 5,000 we anticipate here in our block party and the 15,000 through our partnerships across 120 locations, it's a massive, massive day. And so we invite folks to just get out and play on that day, even if there's not an official play day activation in your neighborhood or in your community. Just go outside and have a good time and play and shoot some hoops or whatever it may be. And put that on social media too. And tag the LA84 Foundation, tag the Play Equity Fund, use hashtag Playday25. We can have a unified celebration on social media as well.
Amazing. Absolutely amazing. So it's not too late for folks to get involved. So even if there's not an activation in your community, you can still participate on social media. And for communities that are interested in getting involved, they can reach out and see how they can be part of it or activate their community for June 28th.
Yes, we invite everybody to jump in. It's really, like I said, the vehicle is joy. We're not going to get to play equity by always communicating the challenges and barriers. We've got to elevate the solutions and lead with joy. I think especially our leaders, our elected leaders and community leaders, if they can reconnect with the joy of sport and play and movement, then we can make more progress that way.
James, I don't know if you know this, but the mission of Kuul Play is to bring the joy of movement and play to every kid. So it resonates completely. It really is about that joy for kids. And what better way to do it than in a fun activation? And the block party in LA sounds absolutely fantastic and amazing for all those in the area. Could you maybe paint or give us a sense of the picture from last year? What did it feel like to be on the ground for that joy?
Yeah, last year was the first time we did like a block party, right? So it felt like the Coachella for play. Like everybody was happy to be there. There was music and food trucks and kids doing double dutch and trying unique sports like archery or learning how to juggle a football. Even we want to elevate the importance of sport and play to connect arts and culture and bring folks together. So there was a muralist on site. So everywhere you turned, there was something fun to do and something to learn. And, I watched a lot of families share a laugh, as kids tried something new and dancing, just tons of dancing with the music. It was just so joyful, and dance as movement and play. It was a great atmosphere. And so I would encourage, like I said, anyone in the LA area to come on out, but everywhere you turn, there was something fun to try, something new to do. And the intersection of arts and culture and music and sport, it really was akin to like an Olympic atmosphere, an Olympic festival. And so really looking forward to this year. I imagine we'll get even more folks coming out. Yeah. Now that they've had, their first go, they'll be back and they'll bring a friend or they'll bring a cousin and it'll be bigger and better. But I count it a privilege to be a part of the organization that's hosting and providing this opportunity for a community. And it's right in the West Adams neighborhood. And if you're not familiar, there's schools right here. But it's kind of like a busy neighborhood. Adams is like a busy street that shoots east and west through various neighborhoods in LA. And there really isn't an opportunity like this in this neighborhood. And our office is in a house really in a neighborhood. So all of our neighbors were also very grateful. So even on the very hyper local sense, it feels good to be part of the neighborhood and provide something for our neighbors.
That's incredible. I think LA28 has a lot to live up to by the sounds of the joy and the fun that's going to be on Play Day this year. And in the current environment that we have, we absolutely need more joy. So really for folks to go out and be part of that, and what could be better than a smile, laugh and moving your body and having fun, right? James, I'm wondering, before we wrap up, could we do a short rapid fire round, a couple of quick questions, whatever comes to mind on play?
Sure, let's do it.
Okay, so one thing that people get wrong about what equity actually means.
That there's not enough for everybody. There is enough for everybody. We just got to do the extra to make sure it's an even playing for those who haven't had access to resources, or in this case, play historically.
The most moving thing you've ever seen on Play Day?
I think just like I said, folks dancing, just like a very cultural, free movement. The dancing at Play Day was just inspiring and lovely.
One policy change that you feel would unlock the most access overnight?
I think fully funded PE in schools and fully funded after school sports and recreation in public schools.
Complete this sentence. If every kid had access to play.
If every kid had access to play, we would be a healthier society.
And then last one. If you got to create one sign that you could hang in every school gym, what would that say?
Play hard, have fun. Play hard, have fun. Yeah.
James, let's just close with this. I mean, you've been in the system, you know the system, you've seen the system, you're helping reshape it. What gives you hope right now?
What gives me hope is the energy we have around the value of sport and play and movement. I think everyone you talk to, when you explain to them what play equity is or what our mission is, they say, oh yes, I support that. It's not a tough sell to say that kids should be able to move their bodies and play and build social connections through play. So what gives me hope is that in conversation and in community, there is kind of a unified spirit around play that is moving us forward, and staying grounded in community, talking to our partners and youth and families, talking to folks, to coaches, especially who are in the work every day. Staying grounded gives me hope, and having those conversations, because from where we sit in the ecosystem of sports and play, we're a little bit removed. We don't serve kids directly. So when we get the chance to talk directly to kids and families and providers, that gives me a lot of hope, because I can see the energy and feel the movement building. And so what gives me hope is staying grounded.
James, it's been such a joy to talk with you today. I know that we could talk for a long time and a lot of this, and I'm super excited about Play Day, and we'll put all the details in our communications, and I'm really hoping that you have the biggest turnout yet, not just in LA, but all of us in all our communities. And even if you're a family, just move and play. So we'll be supporting and cheering from afar. And thank you so much for all the advocacy you're doing in California and your work to make play more equitable for kids.
Thank you, Claire, and we appreciate your support, and thanks for having us as part of the Cool Play Conversations. I think these conversations are super important. We can connect, share some space, and elevate resources for folks. We'll see you on Play Day. We'll be sure to give you all the resources to share out.